you, Mr. Tumlin, for a very invigorating presentation. I'm not sure I can put all the parts together with outdoor sex, so never mind. I think Vice Mayor Faust might have a comment after that comment I just made. So.
Actually, I was writing down words that I don't think we've ever heard in these council chambers before. Frankly, that I'm not going to repeat right now. But you definitely got our attention. And Mr. Tumlin, I want to thank you because your presentation was very interesting and thought-provoking. The style and the way you present is just terrific. What I'd like to ask you, since you've been coming to Redwood City since 1987, we've had a lot of changes, especially since we put in the downtown precise plan. There is feelings in the community that it happened too quickly, that we had thought it would take maybe 10, 15 years to have everything happen the way it is now. How would you help us address the community concerns that are out there with ideas, shared parking, office and residential kind of within walking distance from each other? How can we do that?
It's a challenge. I mean, it's so funny. I frequently use the Redwood City story as I'm traveling around the country as an exemplar for a place that's really doing it right. And the problems that you're facing here are really problems of success, right? And that's not to dismiss them. There are significant problems here, and there are problems that communities that are experiencing this level of economic success routinely face. So there's a set of problems that is rooted simply in the pace of change, right? We, all of us, again, we have specific habitat needs as humans, and there's a kind of familiarity that we long for, there's a certain limit to the amount of change that either individuals or social groups can easily adapt to. Some of us are more adaptable to change than others, but there's a sort of range that is healthy for any community. And so when you have, as we do here throughout California, or at least coastal California, this pattern of boom-bust economies, right? Where you go through these long troughs where nothing happens, right? You go through a planning process, you create an envelope for something to happen, the boom hits, and it all happens at once. To a certain degree, there's not much that you can do about that problem other than focus on managing it well, and focusing on issues like helping to maintain the social institutions of a community. So one of the things that I get most concerned about that gets lost is social capital in any community are the relationships that we have with the people around us, how well we know our neighbors, how involved we are in the democratic process, the rates of voting, how civic-minded we are. That requires a set of relationships that take time to develop. And so during a period of economic boom, new people are arriving, existing people are being displaced, our social networks are being eroded. And so there becomes an opportunity and necessity for a city to step in and start facilitating the building of those relationships again. Things as simple as helping neighborhoods to throw block parties, to get to know their new neighbors, and have more of a sense of confidence. Things that all of you do as local elected officials, showing up in your neighborhoods, showing leadership that you understand what's happening, you understand the nature of the problems, and that you're listening. On the more on the transportation side, all of the things that we need to do are around managing the transportation system as new people are coming in. Obviously, parking management is a very good place to start. Parking oftentimes becomes a proxy for unrelated anxiety about change. And so it's one of the most important things to manage very well as the city is changing. And so building upon your past success in managing to a parking availability target, making sure that you're continuing to collect data and fine-tuning the pricing of parking to make sure that there are always a few empty parking spaces in every parking lot, every garage, every block face. That becomes especially important in a time of rapid change. And then investing in getting information out to people about the alternatives that they may have to driving. One of the best things about driving is it's the most obvious thing to do. Figuring out how to walk or bike or take transit is harder. And so when there's lots of new people here, it becomes all the more important to get them the information that they need in order to be able to make different choices than driving. And that's harder.
Thank you. I think Vice Mayor Faust had one more comment or question.
It's just interesting what you talked about with the social institutions in a community, because on the street I live in, both my neighbors on either side have changed within the last 3 years. Now, we could all make jokes about it's because our house is in the middle, but I'm not going to go there because we've had young families move in. So I have 3 young children, probably under the age of 8 on one side, and on the other side I have 2 young children, like 10 and 5, let's say. They absolutely love Redwood City. And they talk about it, and they want to ride their bikes downtown. So it's very interesting to hear people coming from somewhere else and talking about the community, and then talking to the folks that left, and kind of bringing what you said in terms of getting the block party, getting the community engagement piece of it. I think our downtown concert series in the summer is one way that we kind of bring everyone together, not even just neighborhood by neighborhood. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Faust. Councilmember Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Tumlin. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. You may know that we're involved on a regional level with the Grand Boulevard Initiative, but I wanted to know, what do you see Redwood City's next steps now that we've heard your presentation? We've got the information sitting here. What do you see as some of our next steps as we go forward?
Well, again, I think Redwood City should really be celebrated for all of the fantastic work that you all and your staff have done in the past. So you've got a lot of plans that are that have been adopted and need to be fully implemented, right? You know, there's implementation sections for all of those. A lot of that has been done, but not all of that, and that takes time and effort and staff time and resources. So I think, you know, those things are already laid out for you. As you know, you're moving forward into your next planning tasks. You know, I think one of the things that you'll want to do is to collect more data about your new residents. You know, who they are, what they want, what is your market position, and how do you make sure that you're planning for your future in a way that anticipates your residents' future needs. This is something that I think many cities struggle with, is they manage to their present population rather than their future population. And indeed, you know, you're all elected by the present population. And so you very much need to pay attention to their needs, while at the same time looking ahead. You know, you're all asked to be leaders in this regard. And that's potentially one of the greatest challenges that you face on your side of the dais.
Thank you, Councilmember Howard. Before we take Mr. Ackman, this is a great foundation presentation, because the RFQ for consultants for El Camino is out, or that's more of a question, so can you confirm where we are with that?
We're about to release it. It'll go out within the next few weeks, so it's something that we'll be seeing soon coming to the council.
So we are beginning that process to start planning for El Camino. Thank you. Councilmember Bain.
Thank you. I think it was indeed a very thought-provoking presentation. I appreciate it. I think it probably provoked a number of different thoughts for each of us. A couple of things that stood out for me were the example where you had the woman who goes downtown and then she drops her daughter off at school and then she goes to work and only does one car trip. She does her shopping there. And as I was watching that example, I was thinking that's not how it plays out in our downtown. And the conclusion I found myself coming to is perhaps it is time to open up our plan and say, is it playing out the way we expected it to? Are there other uses we should be looking at downtown that aren't being achieved under the current plan? How is it affecting car trips? I think that I fully agree with you in terms of getting a constant flow of data so we can be examining that. but I don't think we can put a plan in place and watch it play out and not adjust it as needed. So that was one thought. The other thought was, I think, what you closed with, which was about when something's beautiful, it helps people fall in love with it or embrace it. I'm not sure exactly what your words were. And as I watch your plan play out, I'll just say that not everything is beautiful. And I think that that's part of what people are reacting to in this community is that I think that if, in some cases, if the buildings that had been built were beautiful, they would be embraced a lot more. And I think that that's something where we need to examine the role of aesthetics in the plan and perhaps put some new measures in place to ensure a higher degree of aesthetics. So those are not questions per se, but if you are inclined to respond to any of those, I'd be happy to hear your response.
I would agree with you on those points. It's curating your downtown is very challenging to get exactly the right mix. You've got limited authority to control the private market, but that doesn't say that you shouldn't be constantly trying and making the best effort to make your downtown as complete as possible. I also agree, in many communities that I work, we recognize that it's not the change per se or even increases in density or increases in the number of people that are the problem. It's the perceived loss of community character, or when new development is coming in that is not respectful of what existing residents believe community character should be. That creates significant problems, and it's something I've never really quite understood, why developers and architects keep proposing buildings that clearly don't fit in a place, and yet we see this recurring. Obviously, there are many cities that have gone to great lengths, in fact, extreme lengths in the case of, say, Santa Barbara or even a Solvang, California, in order to control design in their community, in order to make it, look and feel like the residents want it to. There are also, more flexible ways of pursuing that, including many interesting examples here in the Bay Area that you can certainly learn from as you're fine-tuning your plan.
Councilmember Gidde.
Mr. Tumlin, it's the second time I heard you. We were Councilmember Pierce and I heard you in Atherton a couple weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. But I'm really excited that you're bringing your show to the peninsula. I mean, that because it helps for the issues you're talking about are not just concentrated to Redwood City. They're regional, especially when we talk about El Camino, the Grand Boulevard Initiative, and all of those. So it's exciting. And what's exciting, too, is tonight we just started our interviews for our Complete Streets Committee. And so I think it gives a lot of food for thought for that new group, our new board that will be working with, looking at things like what you're sharing with us to make the downtown streets, just more pedestrian, more walkable, and moving on to other regions of our city. But you can't make all those changes without thinking what it's going to do to the connections of San Carlos, Menlo Park, and all the cities that surround us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gidde. Councilmember Pierce.
Yeah, Jeff, since you've been coming here for such a long period of time, would you say that we are getting closer with the things that we've been doing to actually having people's daily lives within walking distance? Are we taking the right steps that will enable more of our residents to do that?
I mean, compared to what this was like in 1987, there wasn't a lot to do in downtown Redwood City in 1987. Now, while it's not, you're not done,
there.
Right? You're not, you don't have everything that you need.
Right.
At the very least, what you've created is a interesting destination, right? So you can come here and you can, have dinner and see a movie, right? And and have a drink afterwards and stroll home, right? And there's not that many places where that is possible. I think also it's the sort of place where if you're a downtown area employee, look at how many options you've got for lunch. What is the worst traffic problem time in most of Silicon Valley? it's noon to 1 because people work in office parks where the only place that you can, walk to lunch is the corporate cafeteria. That's not the problem in downtown Redwood City. I mean, certainly you've got noontime traffic, but at least people have options here in a way that they don't in other employment districts.
And then with the housing coming online, that should also help as well, right?
Right, and that with the housing coming online, the other thing that's really important to remember about that housing coming online is it changes the retail equation. What that housing will do is make it possible for stores to survive here because it expands their market hours. And what you consider retail rents in this town, you can't just rely on office workers in order for your store to survive. And so that housing will finally, I hope, make it possible for the rest of many of the needs of daily life to make it here.
And then if you were going to, I know there are a number of people from other jurisdictions in our audience tonight. You're such a draw. You're so entertaining. And what I'd like to ask is, what would you suggest as regional steps that Redwood City and our partners up and down El Camino could take to improve El Camino, to help it be beautiful and sustainable? What would you suggest?
Well, so there really does need to be a public transit strategy for El Camino, right? This is one thing that cities can't just do on their own. And in fact, the Samtrans can't just do on its own, because making public transit work on El Camino requires a partnership of Caltrans, all of the municipalities, the transit operator, and I would argue many of the private employers who, have their offices in the corridor as well. So, putting together a real strategy and implementing it probably incrementally a bit to demonstrate that indeed, if you provide high-quality transit service on El Camino, that people will actually take it. Google has amply demonstrated that high-quality transit, people will take in droves. Google's drive-alone rate now is less than 50%. Google's drive-alone rate is better than San Francisco's drive-alone rate, and its office is in a place with effectively no public transportation. There is no reason, given the nature of El Camino, that we can't meet a similar target if we provide it right. But it's going to require a really strong partnership and visionary leadership. The other thing, of course, is to really focus on walkability. So you can't take the bus if you can't walk to and from the bus stop. So making the incremental investments in the quality of the pedestrian experience on El Camino is really important, and that's partly street infrastructure. It's things like street trees, pedestrian-oriented lighting, and so on. But it's also the quality of the buildings along them. Does it feel safe and comfortable and interesting to walk along El Camino? Or are you walking past, parking lots and, a boarded up, old building that needs a significant renovation? So, all of those things have to be done, and none of that can be done at once. So it's going to require both the big cooperative vision and lots of incremental implementation.
Well, and thank you very much. If I'd met you earlier, I would have become a traffic manager, because I just find it so interesting. Thank you.
Any other council comments? Councilmember Siebert?
I think there's still time to become a traffic engineer. I do. Thank you very much. Very entertaining, and yet there was so much there in taking a page of notes that it's almost like you've got to hear it and concentrate on sections of it. And so the section that I concentrated on is something that has always kind of fascinated me with being in and around cities, and that's the concept of what do we do for future customers? What do our future customers think? What do our future customers need? Because the reality is that's what we're planning for. I mean, the downtown that we are now experiencing began as a task force 20 years ago, not yesterday, not a year ago, not a few weeks ago. This began years ago. And in fact, I would say that it's probably arguable that it started even well before that. And I think that's one of the things that we need to continue to grapple with. I think unlike a business, who can shift a majority of its attention to what its future customers needs, like an Apple or some of the other more progressive businesses. We also need to manage and care for those that are still here. But I think, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe you're seeing different things, that means that the new decisions we're making are required to look even further out. The management decisions we're making and the maintenance decisions we're making can look more insular. So when I look at things like transit and what we do with El Camino, it's probably not even going to make me happy. And it certainly probably isn't going to be designed for myself, perhaps even my kids' generation, perhaps it's even a generation beyond that. But I think that's where we continue to look. And any help, and I'm not asking for answers now, but I think any help as we continue to look at this and resources that you can funnel to the council in how we collect data from those people. Because the other reality is the newest customers, the customers that we truly need and is required that we understand what they think and need, aren't talking to us yet. They may not even be here yet. And if they are, they've just gotten here. They haven't found City Hall. They don't know us. They don't come to our insular events, and they don't hang out with us yet. And I think that's critical. I look at that. It's interesting, some of the examples that were given. One of them is activity, this idea that people come and park in one place. I think what the city's done is set the table for that to happen. The schools can't automatically move downtown where somebody could park and shop at Sequoia Station and go and work at Box and then take their kid to soccer practice because there's no place to play soccer nearby. The schools aren't going to automatically move downtown and take over a big piece of land. But I think something else you said that was really interesting was making cycling and walking safer, so that shorter distance, so that when I commute from way up in Emerald Hills down here to work, that my child can then bike or walk a safe distance to do that. I know the example showed, I think, to some degree, something that it's right. It's not going to happen here. But I think we've set the table for that process to begin to happen in other ways, like smaller lengths of connectivity. I think the other, it's interesting that the issue of aesthetics was mentioned. I don't like some of the buildings, but my kids love some of the buildings that I don't like. I don't see Santa Barbara and Solvang as examples of vibrant young communities that have paid a lot of attention to the future generations. I've spent time in both of those communities in the last year. I know it was Solvang and Santa Barbara were my parents, God love them, their favorite place to be. My dad led buses of people his age to those cities to enjoy weekends. And I'm not saying anything against them. They're a different part of the state than I am. But again, I think we've got to look at beyond the information that we're getting from the people that are here, not to discount that, but truly try and tap into the information of people that aren't here, that aren't talking to us yet. Because I think we'd hear a very different story. And I think we'd make very different decisions, even than those that we think we don't like right now. So I'd be interested to hear more about that, especially about, I think, and I will go back to El Camino, I'm excited about the direction this council's moving, because I think the example where we've been able to successfully set the table for success, we haven't built anything in downtown Redwood City. I mean, we could barely take credit for Courthouse Square, maybe, at least getting that started. And I know, and I'm not taking anything away from my colleagues that worked on that, but those were great ideas that bubbled up from this community and from others. And I think that we need to apply that success to El Camino and look forward to doing that in the future.
So I love what you said about management and maintenance decisions being issues that we need to pay attention to our current population. But planning and infrastructure, which we do now, that gets implemented 20 years from now and then has a useful life of 80 years, right? For those decisions, you can't pay attention to our own needs. All of us have to anticipate the needs of future generations. Something I find very interesting to do is to talk to the 16-year-old girls that I know, recognizing that 16-year-old girl is our design customer. 16-year-old girl. Well, firstly, as a middle-aged white man, I am economically irrelevant. If my demographic group effectively makes no purchasing decisions. We do not exist. Advertisers know I do not exist. That for most key decisions, particularly major purchases and locational decisions, both for workplace locations, but particularly home locations, those decisions are made overwhelmingly by women. And those future decisions are going to be made by the 16-year-old girls of today. So if you want to get information about what we should be planning for today, talk to the girls and young women in your life. Ask them what they want in order to help us make better decisions about the future of our cities. And I can guarantee you, you're going to get some really interesting answers. And most likely some surprisingly smart answers as well. I continue to be really impressed by how thoughtful a lot of the girls in my life are, and the way they see cities and the way they see social institutions as well. Very different than my generation, and in a way that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
I would only add one comment. I was reminded because I have spent a good portion of my life surrounded by women, my daughters. Just want to clarify that.
Good recovery.
Microphone back on. I was doing so well up to that point. It's interesting as you bring ideas forward, or as you encourage places to bring ideas forward. I count back to my oldest daughter spent the last 3+ years living in the Mission District in San Francisco. It drove me nuts the day she moved there, and it drove me nuts over time to visit there. I couldn't stand it. And yet on tours and up alleys and places I don't think we should have gone, and other places, I learned to understand that it is probably those places that I don't like right now that I need to be paying attention to, because those are the markets. Because look at the Mission now. It's not a place where I'd move right now. It's not a place now that I even need to necessarily hang out in anymore unless I want to go there. She moved, and that makes me warm and fuzzy. But at the same time, it's very successful, and it is paying attention to those future needs. And as places like that, people that sit in these seats, oftentimes I even find myself wanting things that make me comfortable, and yet the Mission District makes me uncomfortable, and that's what's so great about it. So I just encourage you, especially for me, it's examples like that will drive me crazy and push the envelope in terms of my comfort level that are probably where we need to be headed.
Thank you, Councilmember Siebert. Just to wrap up, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic about living for the moment but planning for the future. And your comments about, if we take 20 years plus for downtown, whatever we plan today will be realized in 2035, 2040-ish. And trying to understand what our city and what our region wants and needs and desires at that point is something that is going to take a lot of hard work. I'm going to make it really easy for you, Mr. Tumlin. If you were to come back to see us in 10 years from now, what would you change in your presentation?
Well, I think that I wouldn't have to do much of any of this presentation 20 or 30 years from now, because I think that myth that was established in 1933 by General Motors, this Jetsons vision of the city of the future, right? When you ask any of us to imagine the city of the future, we're still tapping into memes and images that were put forward by automobile advertising companies in 1933. They have not changed. We're stuck with a 1933 vision of the city of the future. I think that image is collapsing in upon itself, largely because we're finally seeing through the lie that the car is just a tool. It's a great tool, but it's just a tool. And in fact, in 2035, our great-grandchildren will, look up at us and say, great-granddaddy, I heard that in the olden days, people used to drive their own cars. Is that true? And, we get a twinkle in our eye and say, well, yes. And then, our great-granddaughters will say, but great-granddaddy, doesn't that mean that lots of people died? Well, yes, in fact, tens of thousands of them did every year. We won't have to say that anymore, right? Right? This sort of connection between our vision of the city of the future and limitless mobility will be broken. And instead we'll be focusing on the primary constants of human society, which have to do with our bodies and our minds and our happiness. we know the kind of habitat that makes us healthiest and happiest as social primates that we are, right? We'll have built those out, and we'll be asking an entirely new set of questions, and this presentation will have seemed very quaint and out of date, and people will laugh that we were even struggling with such issues.
We'll have new issues to struggle with in 2035, and I'm pretty confident about that. Mr. Tumlin, thank you for coming to Redwood City and sharing your insights and thoughts, and we look forward to looking to new ones as we evolve and develop. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
On to our next item on the agenda.